Good afternoon. Welcome to our Wednesday Link Up to Lift Up. Today is Wednesday, the 5th of July. I hope you all had a safe and restful 4th of July. The weather appeared to cooperate for the most part, at least here within the central Richmond area. Still was a warm one, though. Today, not as warm, but you guys still need to be aware of the humidity coupled with the heat. Creates a very stressful situation for the body. So be sure to keep yourselves hydrated, drink plenty of fluids, especially water, caffeinated beverages, sodas, and coffee, tea, things like that tend to sort of expedite the dehydration process. And so the most important thing you can do is keep yourself hydrated. If you've got to be out in the heat, the best thing you can do is just find yourself some air conditioning and just chill there for today. My name is Tommy Fleming. I'm the pastor at First Union Baptist Church. We're located at 6144 Durwood Road in Richmond Southside area. And if you have the chance, yes, you're absolutely right, Wendy. Drink lots of water. That's the key. Wendy is our resident nurse, and so she keeps us abreast of those types of things. Um, Again, thank you guys for joining in today. Just want to drop a quick word in your spirit. On Sunday, we had a wonderful worship experience, and our preaching came from a particular section within the Bible. It was First Samuel, the 8th chapter, and we focused our attention on the 4th and 5th verses. It's an interesting um, piece of text. For context, it was a time in Israel's life when they were um, operating under what was called judges. And the judges had the primary responsibility of telling Israel what to do, providing in person judgment for the activities they engaged in. And in this particular instance, it was the prophet Samuel. And so Samuel had gotten old, and Samuel had attempted to appoint some of his sons in the role of judge, but those sons didn't behave right. They could not maintain the standards that their father had established. There are some biblical experts who said that Samuel, in this particular instance, actually operated outside of the will of God in assigning them. And that's why things went a little bit left. They went left because the elders of the city of Ramah approached Samuel. And not only did they express their displeasure with his sons, but they also pointed out the fact that he was becoming old, that he was gray haired, and they felt he was no longer fit for service. And they requested a king. God had not, God had promised them a king, but that was in the future. They wanted what God had promised in the future right now. That's a whole nother sermon. And sort of what we focused on Sunday is that what happens when God gives you what you want. And of course, we're talking about the things that are outside of the will God has established for you. In the 6th verse, which we didn't have an opportunity to address on Sunday, we find some insightful words in the text. It says, "The thing displeased Samuel when they said, 'Give us a king to judge us.' And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. The text tells us that he prayed unto the Lord. And I know that, that is the proper perspective to take. That when you are faced with difficult situations, when you are faced with challenges, that the thing you ought to do is take it to the Lord in prayer. But I want to tell you today that, especially during this Wednesday link up to lift up, that when you go to God in prayer, you need to go to God in prayer with the proper perspective. Samuel had a relationship with God. And this relationship with God, God talked to Samuel, and Samuel would talk to the people. That's the purpose of a prophet. A prophet sort of stands there, receive the word from God, and then they pass that word on to the people. A priest, on the other hand, the flip side, stands before God for the people. He talks to God about the people. So he stands there as a sort of intercessory. And so the relationship Samuel had with God was as God's prophet. And so Samuel was used to going to God to find out what he needed to tell the people. Now, you know, not all of us have that perspective when it comes to our prayer lives. If the truth be told, when we engage in prayer, most of the time, we want something from God. It is something that we want from Him that drives us to prayer. If it is healing that we want, healing for ourselves or healing for someone in our circle of friends, someone that encountered during our daily trek. Our prayer to God is for something. It may be salvation. I once heard someone say that God doesn't hear a sinner's prayer, but that is the prayer God heard from us. And so you can be praying for salvation, not only for yourself, but pray for salvation for those around you. Whatever the case is, we're going to be asking God for something. We're looking for tangible changes in our lives, changes in our employment, changes in our financial status, changes in our relationship status. We're praying to God for something. We're asking for strength for the trials that you're enduring now. And if you're smart, you're praying for strength for the trials that will come as well. Because I don't know, if you've been here long enough, you know that that old adage holds true for us, that you're either in a storm, coming out of a storm, or you're headed into a storm. Unfortunately, that is the perspective we have to take in this Christian journey, because the world is not our friend. The world is an enmity to us. It stands in direct opposition to what it is we stand for in representing Christ. When we pray, we need to take upon ourselves the proper perspective. And I can't think of a better perspective to take when it comes to prayer than to take the perspective of Jesus. As followers of Jesus, as Christians, as those who have taken up not only his name, but taken up his banner, taken up his goals and his purposes, taken up his footsteps, the challenge for us is to make our lives even more like Christ. Now, the Bible tells us that Jesus, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal to God. What does that mean? I know we've heard that text over and over again, but let's look at that text for what it truly means. What that text means is that Jesus, in and of himself, had been gifted by God. He had been derived from God, gifted by God, gifted from God, and he was gifted to God. He was gifted from God to us, and he was gifted to God for God's purpose and his commitment. Jesus had a close and personal relationship with his Father. He declared himself any number of times that the Father and I are one. It is a position, unfortunately, that we don't hold as followers of Christ. But I submit to you this, that if Jesus, with the close, tangible relationship he had with his Father, with the direct connection he had to his Father. If Jesus found it necessary, hear me out, he found it necessary to be in prayer to his Father. He and his Father thought alike. He and his Father acted alike. He and his Father had the same goals in mind. And in spite of that, Jesus felt it was important enough, as part of him was human, to be sure that any and everything he had, he took to God in prayer. He didn't take it to God to ask God for something. He didn't take it to God because the situation he was in was bigger than he was. However, there was that instance in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus approached God's throne of grace. The Bible tells us that he was under such stress, under enduring so much angst in that particular moment that he began to sweat drops like blood. It is actually a physical condition for some people, a medical condition that is known today, that when they're under duress, intense stress, that their body begins to perspire drops of blood. And that was the situation that Jesus found himself in. And even in that moment, he asked God, he said, Father, if it be possible, may this cup pass from me. But nevertheless, not as I will, but thy will be done. Even in that moment of challenge, even in that moment of weakness, even in that moment of profound physical and emotional agony, Jesus sought what his Father's will was. And if we're to be followers of Christ, we should emulate not only his talk, meaning, the words that we share ought to be uplifting words, but we ought to emulate his thoughts as well. We ought to emulate his walk. We ought to emulate our thoughts about ourselves. And our thoughts about ourselves, Jesus never put himself up on a pedestal. You might remember that he was approached one time by a young man who called him good teacher. And Jesus' response was, why callest thou me good? He said, there is none good except God. There is none good except God. And when we have that as our perspective, when we approach prayer with the perspective of the publican who, along with the Pharisee, went to the temple to pray, Jesus tells the story that the Pharisee approached the throne of grace and he began to pray with himself, is how Jesus described it. What he did, in essence, was essentially tell God all the good things he was doing in his life, telling God about all of the things he had accomplished, telling God how he tithed on a regular basis, how he had not messed around on his wife. He laid down a list of of the good things he did. But this publican, the Bible tells us, he stood afar off, would not even approach that throne, and he said that I am not worthy. His declaration was that I am just a faithless, worthless sinner, and that was the approach he took to God. Now I know in our world, self-esteem is so important, and so it's hard for us, difficult, hard for us to make that sort of assessment about ourselves. But if we're honest with ourselves, if we're honest enough to measure our behaviors, our thoughts, our words against those of Jesus, we understand that we do come short more often than not in our aspirations. And so because we know, left to our own human devices, we will come short, that it's important that we develop that proper perspective in our prayer life. That our prayer begins with, first off, God, please forgive me. I'm trying to do my best. I'm facing these challenges. I'm going through these issues right now. And God, what I want is to be more like your son, Jesus. What I want more than anything else is to be able to align my will with your will, to take me and use me so that your will might be done. Not my will, but your will might be done. And when we take that proper perspective in our prayer life, we'll see things change. We'll hear from God. God will affirm or God will deny what it is that we're seeking for him. And sometimes God is silent in his answer. And in those moments of silence, it is incumbent upon us to wait until we have heard from God. Not only do we need to consider ourselves when we approach his throne of grace in prayer, but we need to be considerate of others. Some of Jesus's most fervent prayers were lifted up for others. You may recall his prayer to God for his disciples, those that were placed in his hand. Jesus had a genuine concern for their well-being. Jesus understood that once he left, that even with the presence of the comforter that he would leave for them, that they still needed to be propped up on every leaning side by God. And that's our position as well, my friends. I don't know if you know it, but we truly need to be propped up. You know, it's during moments of difficulty, it's during those moments of duress in our own lives that we most fervently turn our attention to God. And I would have you to know, my friends, that even in those moments of duress, even when it appears that you have been overwhelmed beyond your measure to bear it, that God is still a faithful and present help in your time of trouble. That God continues to nurture us, to lift us up in every way. I don't know what you're going through today. I don't know the challenges that you're facing, but in prayer with the proper perspective, God can and God will work it out in your favor. And that's the thing we've got to remember, that all things work together for good to them who love God and who are called according to his purpose. As I said on Sunday, if you're on the winning team, you get the benefits of being on the winning team as well. You may not have played a minute in the game. You may not have hit the free throws. You may not have run the touchdown. You may not have hit the home run. But when you're on the winning team, you get the benefits of winning as well. And God's team definitely is the winning team. I hope that this prayer with proper perspective has given you something that you can sort of focus on in the upcoming week. It's important that when we're going through, that we have that proper perspective. It's important that when life's challenges begin to rise up against us, that we keep the proper perspective. Every day is not going to be grins and giggles in this Christian journey. Every day, it won't be a path treaded on you won't be treading on a path that's been sprinkled with roses. Sometimes you get the thorns. Sometimes you get the tough times. But God is and has always been a very present help, even in the time of trouble. So I pray that your Wednesday continues with the blessings that you've already received. I pray that you will keep cool during this very warm and humid season that we find ourselves in, and make every effort to keep yourself properly hydrated and take care of yourselves. Again, thank you. Take care of yourselves. Do good.